Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the final GRID Live Encore episode of 2023. I'm Ben Schneider, and look who's here, GRID Network's fearless leader, Joe Sammiego. Joe, it's great to see you. I don't know if we've ever done a GRID show one-on-one before. I know I had you on my podcast earlier this year, but I think this might be the first time it's just the two of us. How's it going? How was your Thanksgiving?
Overall, it's good. Excited to be here. Thanksgiving was great. A little chilly in the Pacific Northwest, but clear skies. Can't complain when it's sunny, a little chilly, but still a good day for just being with everyone, taking it easy, and then being thankful for everything we are, including what's been a great race in the year overall. And Formula 2 season 5, boy, that was something to be grateful for as well, because non-stop entertainment.
Yeah, I'll save it from a shining moment, but I think there might have been more action on the opening lap of the sprint race than there was the entire season, maybe excluding races like Las Vegas. In Formula One, but we'll get into that here as we start the show. And good to see one of our new regulars, Kane's Cats Heat 305. This is the last encore show. We'll have Women in Motorsports later this week, and then Grid Tonight will continue on throughout the off season. Stay tuned for some roundtable shows we're hoping to produce as well, and then encore will be back in February once the NASCAR season starts up with ARCA and Trucks and Xfinity all making their return at Daytona. And I agree with you. The best topic, the Junior Series. That's what we love to cover here at GRID Live Encore. And we also love the support that our Patreon members have given us. Colin, Michelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. Thank you so much for everything you've done for us throughout 2023 and beyond. Your support means the world to us. It's what allowed me to join Joe at Portland earlier this year. And as you can see, we have an ambitious goal, $500 per month. That will help us begin attending races on site on a more regular basis, make that a more common occurrence for us here at GRID in 2024. So if you like what you see tonight, you can consider joining them, or you can also make a one-time donation through Buy Me a Coffee or the YouTube Super Chat if you're watching on that platform. Now, we'll start with the F2 sprint race and feature race the weekend in Abu Dhabi. It's the only race weekend we have to cover tonight, and then we'll get into a couple of open segments. But as our own Joshua Birch predicted at the start of the year, it ended up being Théo Pourchaire who took the series championship. He held off a hard-charging Frederick Vesti to win the F2 title. As you can see, Vesti ended up winning the sprint race. He also finished on the podium in the feature, but Pourchaire still picked up enough points to win the championship by 11 markers over his closest rival. And as I mentioned, Joshua Birch had something to say about that. He couldn't be here tonight. I know he wanted to be. He's getting ready for some more MotoGP coverage on his channel. But this is the prediction that he made in March of this year when it came to who would lift the trophy in Formula 2 at the end of the season.
For Formula 2, I said it in commentary, I think we're going to see Ralph Boschung sort of have a coming of age. He's getting quite used to the car. He was loving life. But I think Théo Pourchaire is going to be the champion. I really do. Pourchaire needs to perform this year. It's his third season in Formula 2. And he wants that Formula 1 seat, doesn't he? He's been after it for so long. I think we're going to see him run away with the title. Formula 3, it is a bit too early to tell. Formula 2, it's slam dunk. It's going to be Pourchaire.
All right, well, not the season Ralph Boschung would have wanted. He ended up 16th in the points. He had a brilliant opening round of the year, but then really kind of fell towards the back of the pack. But Josh was absolutely right when it came to who won the title. It is Théo Pourchaire at the end of the year. So, Joe, let's just get your reactions to start off. Théo Pourchaire is your champion, but were you surprised? This is the question I want to ask you. I had to go back and watch the feature highlights. I'd forgotten just how hard he raced Frederick Vesti, his championship rival there, in the closing laps of the feature race. Were you surprised that happened, given the championship lead that he had, the number of points he was up on Vesti?
Considering the championship scenario, I was surprised to see that kind of racing on the last lap. This was the kind of last lap other motorsport series, especially one with fenders in the United States, will love to see this for the championship. Overall, I thought this was going to be pretty straightforward. I thought the first lap of the sprint race, where you had 4 drivers going 3 wide, I thought that's where we were going to really see the big impact. Vesti, he was so aggressive in that start, but just continued all weekend long. And at the end, that 33rd, that final lap at Abu Dhabi, edge of your seat drama, just waiting to see how it happens. And at the end, to see the car go airborne. Of course, this is open wheels. That's just prone to happening. This was just the kind of stuff where people are going to be talking about this. And I think, as in the comments, one of the best topics, I would say this was one of the best races, as you said, because from the first lap of the sprint race, which kicked off everything, it just seemed to set the tone like this was going to be a show it was going to steal the show from Formula One. Formula One, I know some folks talked about that season finale. If you weren't following the points, it was just almost a procession. But this one, it stole the weekend show, in my opinion. Formula 2, the sprint race, the feature, the championship battle with all the drivers involved. This is something not to forget. And overall, I was really impressed. The competition was great. The aggression, yeah, a little bit out of place, but we're all talking about it today. And I think a lot of viewers going to remember it for a long time to come. Good and bad reasons, of course.
Yeah, well, I'll read a couple comments from Kane's Cat Heat 305 here. Beauchamp definitely came on in the first 2 rounds, then back to his old ways. I thought Ralph was going to win the title after round 2. The gates opened for him in round 2, went from 10th to 2nd in one corner. Well, as we mentioned, you weren't alone because you had our own Joshua Birch predicting that he would be perhaps the closest championship rival to Théo Pourchaire, and ended up not being that way, obviously, for Beauchamp as the season went on. And one more comment here. I woke up early in the States to watch F2 and F3 every weekend. It always delivered, besides a few races, same with FRECA and Formula 4. That's a pretty good commitment there, I must say, Kane's Cat Seat 305. I watched the F2 feature race last year at 4 a.m. because Logan Sargent was going for his super license, and that was important to me as an American viewer to see if we were going to get the confirmation that he'd get the Williams seat. But I'll do it for the occasional F1 race every once in a while. I know Malaysia used to be the toughest when you had to get up at 3 a.m. Eastern time for that one. But most of the F2, F3 weekends, I try to catch it on tape delay or catch the highlights at least. But that's commitment there. So kudos to you for that. And Joe, to your point as well, again, the last lap contact, it's an unfortunate break for Zay Maloney, who went from a podium place with half a lap to go there to ending up down there in 17th. But Vesti ends up taking a podium. He almost did everything he could do to close that championship gap. He really, you can say you're a little bit surprised by how hardly Pourchaire took the fight to Vesti, knowing that he only had to prevent himself from being outscored by a certain number of points. He could obviously afford to let Vesti pass him, period, but just had to keep the gap under his watch there. But obviously Vesti was just going for the maximum amount of points he needed. So definitely a good close championship battle there that came down in the end, but Pourchaire ended up still coming out on top. And Joe, I think you might have something else you want to add there as well.
Yeah, it just sort of reminded me as you were talking about everything. The first lap of the sprint race, we saw the great racing, but we knew there was a caution flag for the second sector, I believe. The race control, the race officials, they allowed them to keep racing until they were getting really to the point where, okay, we need to bring the safety car out because they're coming to the stuck vehicles from that first lap incident. I feel like that also a little bit set the tone of the race weekend. Like, okay, race control is going to allow them to settle this on the track. They don't want to have as much interference, and I think overall they allowed the racers to race for the championship. I think that was something worth mentioning.
Yeah, well, I guess since it came up in conversation, I'll do my one shining moment very, very early here, but you're absolutely right. That 4-car battle for the lead, I know I mentioned it very briefly in the intro, but you had Enzo Fittipaldi, Frederick Vesti, Richard Verschoor, and Isaac Hadjar all going for it on the opening lap. And again, like you mentioned, Joe, kudos to them for letting the drivers get through most of the opening lap and being able to see that battle play out organically. Formula 2, I really think, we always joke all the time, Xfinity is the pinnacle of stock car racing. I think Formula 2, when you talk about the quality of the racing that we see in that series, if you've been sleeping on the series, I know I just mentioned, I don't usually wake up to watch them live because of how early they are, but definitely make sure you catch it on tape delay. If you're an ESPN viewer here in the States, you can catch it through the ESPN app, or you can watch the highlights on YouTube. It is a fantastic, fantastic series when it comes to the quality of the racing that we see. And the opening lap was just further proof of that, I would say. Now let's talk a little bit about the race winner. Jack Doohan won the feature race. We'll get those results pulled back up for you there. Sorry, kind of lost my train of thought there for a second, but he finished behind the two championship protagonists in the standings, ended up taking third in the points on the heels of the victory here in the feature race. Now, Joe, let's bring the conversation back to Pourchaire here. At the moment, we only have one F1 seat that's unconfirmed for 2024. That's currently, of course, the Williams, occupied by Logan Sargent. At the moment, Sargent is the favorite to retain that seat next year. But when asked this weekend, his team principal, James Vowles, said they were unable to confirm anything at this time. If Sargent doesn't get the seat, it's very unlikely that somebody like Pourchaire would be the one replacing him. So on that note, do you think there's a problem with how the ladder system's currently working. Oscar Piastri had to wait a year. There's no guarantee Felipe Drugovich is going to get an F1 seat anytime soon. And now Théo Pourchaire, those are your last 3 champions not going straight into Formula One.
Yeah, it's clearly becoming a problem now to the point where not only are you not having the champions the last 3 years go in, you're also having drivers that made you wonder, are they really supposed to be in Formula One? Nikita Mazepin is the poster child for that. Didn't get a championship, but overall, he got it right because we all know the funding, the sponsorship money is very big. Considering the fact that, we just are coming off this stellar race weekend for Formula 2. If you've been watching Formula 2, you want to see them go up to Formula 1. Bring the new fans that may have been following them throughout their ladder progression from Formula 3, Formula 2, and so on, up to F1. Well, they're now sort of sidelined. Well, that's great if they're a reserve driver role or a testing driver role, but they're not in the public eye. I think it's just really unfortunate that this is becoming more the norm, and for the FIA to keep bragging about the ladder system that they have makes me say, well, you got to look at the IndyCar ladder system. Granted, there was flaws this year where you didn't have the Indy Next champion go race full-time in IndyCar, but that might be changing. We don't know what exactly is going to happen there, but at the end, they have a better track record in the last 3 years of the Formula 2 champion not get it in. So it's just really something else where it's like, okay, if you want to have the rule where the defending champion can't return, great. But have them somewhere meaningful. Yes, a test roll with Formula 1 car is meaningful. But is it really that great to say, well, you could end up here when there could be other areas, IndyCar, United States, so on, that could be opening? I say that's just something where the FIA, they really need to look at and consider, especially as we see how the Formula 1 teams are sort of acting like, we want these 20 seats only. Don't tell us we're going to have a new team. Let us do it. I think the FIA should say, okay, but we should have a say on which drivers lined up so it's truly the 20 best drivers in the world, not some drivers that didn't get championships in the Formula ladder system and just paid their way up there.
Yeah, well, Joe, that's a nice segue into the first open segment we have of the night here. You kind of brought it up for me. The question I think should be asked, should we let Formula 2 champions return? Because I think, if you want to make a NASCAR comparison, I would tell you, Daniel Suarez won an Xfinity championship. He was expecting to come back to the Xfinity Series to defend that title. Obviously, Carl Edwards retired very abruptly, and he was kind of the heir apparent there right in line at JGR to replace him. But a lot of people thought, maybe he was promoted a year sooner than he should have been. He probably would have made more sense for him to come in 2018 rather than 2017 like he did. But if NASCAR had this same rule, that's what Gibbs would have had to do, or they would have lost him in free agency as opposed to a rival team. Should Formula 2 or Formula 1, the FIA, whoever, say, look, we understand there's a limited number of seats, as Kane's Cat Heat 305 mentioned, you only have 20 seats in Formula 1. Should we let perhaps Felipe Drugovich come back and defend his title? I know Théo Pourchaire has been in F2 for 3 years, but if there's no other option, is a fourth year what's best for him? And if he defends his championship, well, then there's really no excuse for F1 teams not to give him a call.
I mean, I would say that's where the devil is in the details when it comes to making such a rule. If you allow the Formula 2 driver to come back, they win the championship, there should be something where it's like, okay, they're going to be in a team racing driver capacity, I would feel, not a testing role or something. Now, of course, the teams in F1, they'll say, oh, we don't like that because we have our own deals. But one of the things we talked about yesterday, when you look at all the F1 drivers and all the winners in F1, out of the active drivers, of course, Lewis Hamilton's number one. Then you have Max Verstappen at 50 plus wins. You have to go all the way down third, Bottas with 10 wins. Everybody else single digits. We're not missing out on drivers that are winning races and, okay, give up your seat. Like Lance Stroll, he's been there for a while, hasn't won a race. We know a lot of people want Drugovich in that car. You look at Williams, Logan Sargent, I know he just completed his first season. I think a lot of folks will make the case he should deserve a second season, be in there. Haas, 2 drivers, been there a long time, no wins. In the case of Hulkenberg, no podiums. Should we have it where those drivers are then systematically replaced as we have Formula 2 champions coming up? I think that is something worth discussing, some sort of process. And if you're not going to have that, have it where, okay, you could do 2 years, maybe a third year max in Formula 2. But make it where it's like if you do get 2 consecutive Formula 2 championships, you get a racing seat. If for some reason you don't defend your second Formula 2 championship, you can come back a third year and try 2 out of 3. But overall, I don't see the big harm in it. I know you have bigger fields in Formula 2. Formula 3 has huge fields, considering they're at the same tracks as Formula 1. I don't see why it can't be done. It's just a matter of getting the teams together, all of them from Formula 2, Formula 3, Formula 1, all the stakeholders involved, making the deal. The details is where it's just going to be really hard to make such a rule. But I, for one, believe there should be some sort of change because there's a lot of folks I think that are starting to get tired of the call. It's the 20 greatest drivers in the world. But you got question marks of, does this driver really need to be here in the F1 grid?
Yeah, well, I remember on this very show, and in fact, this very episode of this very show last year when we were wrapping up Abu Dhabi, I made the case for Felipe Drugovich, and I said, look, he's going to be the reserve at Aston Martin or the development driver at Aston Martin, and that's great. You get a little bit of experience, a little bit of seat time, a little bit of time in the sim and everything. But, Fernando Alonso is in his early 40s. That's very, very old for a Formula One driver. Is he kind of taking that seat away from the next in line, if you will, like a Felipe Drugovich, who's proven himself in Formula 2 and won a championship fairly handily? And obviously, I think Alonso made me eat crow this year with how well he performed. I think now I would say, well, Lance Stroll probably would be the first to go from that seat. But of course, that gets complicated because his dad's major part of the ownership over at Aston Martin. But I think that this is part of why it's so frustrating, to Kane's Cat Heats 305's points here. Thank you for being so active in the chat tonight, by the way. Formula 3, you have 10 cars or 10 teams, 3 cars per team. F2 bumps up to 11. And then if Andretti joins, it would be 12 teams in F2, 11 teams in F3. They said they would join those series as well. And then you have 11 teams in Formula 1 as well. So that would be an extra 2 seats for young drivers to come up through the ranks. And, maybe this problem would be alleviated a little bit like that. But, I think that's part of why I'm so frustrated by the opposition, because we had a situation last year where Colton Herta wanted to be in Formula 1, and obviously he would kind of be who Andretti would want to bring. But then you have the super license issue that also complicates things. But, if he takes one of the AlphaTauri seats, then that kicks somebody else out. I mean, I feel like even though you have the Mazepins of the world and drivers who you say, like, should they really be, are they really F1 material? Even with that, I think you have probably a good 22, 24 drivers who you say, Mick Schumacher, for example. I know he, crashed a lot of cars and, maybe didn't take as much of a step forward in year 2 as people would have liked to see. But, I'm sure he's got to be very frustrated being stuck in a Mercedes reserve role. And I think, most drivers need 2 or 3 years before we can really judge where they're going to be. That's why I hope Logan Sargent comes back next year. I think it would be a shame if he gets shuffled out. I really did not like how Red Bull and AlphaTauri treated Nick de Vries. I thought he didn't get nearly enough time. I thought he was very, very strong in the one start he had with Williams in 22. So I think that the ladder system definitely needs to be looked at because, Joe, to your point, you have a guy like Mazepin finish 5th in Formula 2 and he gets promoted to Formula 1. Logan Sargent last year, he finished 4th in the standings. I'm not saying he shouldn't have been promoted at Williams seat, but what kind of look is it that he gets an F1 seat, but a champion doesn't? If you want to talk about the last American in Formula 1, Alexander Rossi was 2nd in what was at the time GP2 standings in 2015. Rio Harrienzo ended up finishing 4th, and Harrienzo gets the Manor seat over Rossi. So, there's even direct competition there for the one seat that we have left. I just think that when you have the optics of that for F1 and the optics for the FIA are just not good. When you have your champions who are supposedly the best of those trying to get in on the last step before you hit the top of the ladder, and there's no seat for them, I don't think you can make a very strong case that the ladder system works.
one thing, since you bring up Andretti, and we know the saga going on between Andretti, the F1 teams, you mentioned they're going to have a Formula 2, Formula 3 teams. The way the teams in F1 are acting, especially since they have the Concord agreement, it's almost like we're franchises, but they're not really. The FIA could still, say, hey, we want this new team in there, and the F1 teams supposedly will vote on that. If the teams are acting such like a franchise, that's why I believe the FIA should say, okay, but if you finish last in the constructors, you have to give at least one seat up to the F2 champion. This year, that would have been, I believe, Haas F1 that got last. Nico Hülkenberg, yeah, he's a good driver, but he's never gotten podium. That Haas team only 10 or 12 points. I think that's a good room for saying, hey, we need something in place, because at the end of the day, yeah, I know Hülkenberg has the fans out there, especially in Germany, but is he really adding value to Formula One, to Haas, when you could have a young driver that come in after Formula 2 championship, some hype around him? Yeah, I know once again the car and things don't go great. Well, it's going to not go that great, but something new and different, because Hulkenberg has been racing quite a long time. One of the things too, when you brought up about a driver sitting out a season coming back, Esteban Ocon, he sat out, I believe it was 2019, where he was originally with Racing Point, had some good moments here and there, sat out with Mercedes, lands a ride in Alpine. I think we can all say he's done quite good at Alpine since then. But just to have this norm of, okay, you're the champion, well, best of luck to you. You got to the top of the ladder. Will anybody pick you up from there, or are you just stuck there? Is really frustrating.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, bringing up Ocon as well. And, Kane's Cats Heat 305, Mick does not deserve a spot. I don't know. I feel like I disagree with that. I think Mick really, when you look at his F3 and F2 rise up the ladder, it was always the second season where he, won his F3 championship, and then second season F2, he won the championship, and second season F1, he picked up some points. But, you got to remember, it's not like you're going to win a championship and keep that trend going in a Haas. I don't know at the same time. Again, I know he, was known for being a little bit accident prone, even in his second year as well. But, I just think, and again, we have this problem in NASCAR as well. Are we too quick to judge guys who are in some cases literal teenagers or early 20-somethings? This is not an easy job. Driving a race car at the top echelon of motorsports is no easy feat. And it, not everybody's going to be a Max Verstappen. That's what makes the Max Verstappens or the Lewis Hamiltons of the world so incomprehensibly great. It's like, how are you doing this? How are you winning a champion? How are you winning a race at 18? How are you almost winning a championship as a rookie with McLaren in Lewis's case? Very few people can do that. And it's what separates the great drivers from the elite drivers, the ones that are in the GOAT conversation, if you will. I feel like there are so many young drivers that deserve an opportunity here. And particularly, you look at who wins our championships, you would say, okay, that's the best of this crop here. Why is there no seat available for them? This is the third year in a row now. I mean, Mick's the last, correct me if I'm wrong, the last F2 champion that got an F1 seat the next year, right? Piastri had to wait a year, and, thinking back to some earlier champions, I think Gasly had to wait a year. He had to go do Super Formula before he got the Toro Rosso seat. It's not a new problem, but it's a problem nonetheless. And I think that it's something that, we really need to look at. Having an extra team would help. Having an extra couple teams would help. I know Andretti wasn't the only one that submitted an application. So, that's a whole rabbit hole we can go down and be here for another hour. I don't know if we need to do that here tonight, but I think there's a lot to consider when it comes to how we go about trying to fill the grid out. Obviously, money's always going to be a major talking point. But at the same time, almost everybody's a pay driver in some sense nowadays. You can't get to this level if you don't have sponsorship. Obviously, a lot of drivers have more sponsorship and funding than others, but I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting. And I think just to bring it all back and answer the question here that we started this segment with, if this is going to be the norm, if this is going to be the pattern, then, if there's no open ideally, yes, of course, there's an open F1 seat. That clearly hasn't been the case the last few years. So if you're a Théo Pourchaire or Felipe Drugovich, obviously there's IndyCar, there's Super Formula, there's other open wheel series out there, but nothing gives you, obviously all the F1 teams, their eyes are directly on F2 because there are support series. I feel like winning a championship should not prevent you from coming back and defending that championship if you can't get an F1 seat.
One of the things I like to add, you talk about someone to drive. One driver stands out, raced against Mick Schumacher, Callum Ilott.
Right.
Was right up there, didn't get a seat. I think he got like a reserve spot or a testing role, I believe, with the F1 team. But then he tried to advance himself, goes to IndyCar here in the United States. Considering the caliber of racing driver he is, including he's done Macau, he's been all over, but with a team that was building from the ground up and now out of a job, I just think it's just unfortunate that, hey, great effort. He made it to IndyCar. He got adjusted to oval racing even. But with that team towards the back, not even rebuilding, building up to a two-car team, and now out of a job, a lot of folks wondering where he could have gone. He could have easily been an F1 talent, potentially set up for a good F1 career, depending on how the cars play out with the team he had gone with and the setup of the car. But so many good drivers out there that are just sort of missing out, and they always tout this is a successful ladder system. And then you have these situations, and drivers are just making you shake your head, wondering, is this really the best?
Yeah, I almost feel like I can't figure Haas out, because I feel like they've kind of flip-flopped in their mentality. I feel like they kept, at one point, I think Magnussen Grosjean was one of the longest, maybe the longest tenured pairing of teammates in F1. I think they were tied at the end of 2020 season with Bottas and Hamilton at Mercedes, because they wanted stability. They wanted, your veteran drivers who you kind of knew what to expect from, right? But then 2021 comes around, they decide to clean house. They bring in Mick Schumacher, the F2 champion. I suppose they could have brought in Callum Ilott, who finished second, but again, Mazepin finished fifth, but he brought all the funding and everything. And you go with two rookies. It's a very rough season. They don't score a single point. They don't even really develop the car because they know the regulations are about to change. Obviously the whole Russia situation is another rabbit hole we don't have time for, but Mazepin ends up losing the seat, and then they bring Magnussen back. I think a lot of people were expecting Pietro Fittipaldi, their reserve driver, to take that seat. I know Pietro races under the Brazilian flag, but he was born in Miami, spent a lot of time in America. Haas being the American team, there might have been an opportunity for a connection there and some marketability there. But they went with the veteran Magnussen instead. They brought him back. And then Mick Schumacher didn't, in their minds, take enough of a step forward. And then they go to Nico Hülkenberg, who, like you mentioned, Joe, has kind of been the super sub in recent years, but hasn't scored a podium in all the times that he's been in F1. Not that he's ever really been with the top team, but he's had some opportunities here and there, but he just hasn't been able to capitalize on. But he's a veteran, and again, you kind of know what to expect. So there's arguments on both sides of the aisle here, but ultimately what it comes down to is I don't think it's a great look that Callum Ilott's left job hunting and has to go to the States and race IndyCar when he wants to be in F1. And then you have a guy who finishes 3 spots lower in the standings, Mazepin, get the seat instead. I think that alone is proof that, if the ladder system worked, it wouldn't come down to funding as much as it does, to the point where it's determining who fills out the rest of the grid. All right. So we'll leave it there. Certainly lots to talk about. If you're watching live or after the show, leave a comment in the chat room. Tell us what you think. Should F2 champions be allowed to return to the series and defend their titles, just as champions are in some other junior series around the world? Joe, I want to have an open segment here on the Formula One season. I know we don't often talk about the top series on the Encore show, but since we have some time tonight, I was of course, I wasn't on the wrap-up show yesterday. I was traveling back from my Thanksgiving holiday, but I did watch the show back, and I know you guys talked about Red Bull's dominance, and obviously, what we've been talking about for most of this season with how strong Max Verstappen in particular has been. You guys brought up some points yesterday that I think a lot of people have been asking themselves and wondering, because we've seen dominance before. We've seen Michael Schumacher win 5 straight championships with Ferrari in 12 of the first 13 races in 2004. We've seen Mercedes in the turbo hybrid era come very close to a perfect season, 19 of 21 in 2016. Should 21 of 22 really feel that different than 19 of 21? But in some ways, for a lot of people, I feel like it does. So Joe, I'll just throw the question to you first. Does this feel different having Max Verstappen run away with Red Bull like this, or do you think it is comparable to what Lewis Hamilton did with Mercedes and Michael Schumacher with Ferrari before that?
What makes it feel different compared to, I remember when Michael Schumacher, the Ferrari team, they were just unstoppable. You still had hope. Juan Pablo Montoya and Williams could maybe beat them. Kimi Räikkönen and the McLaren could maybe beat them on a given weekend because they were still fast. They had their strengths, and occasionally there will be a race where they would beat them. This year, especially in the beginning part, McLaren, they were not there. Mercedes looked like, okay, they're a second place team, but then they sort of faded, and then here comes Ferrari when they started getting their act together. Carlos Sainz getting that one win, the one weekend where Red Bull just seemed to not do anything great at all. It was just really, it's going to be Max Verstappen. It's going to be Red Bull. I would say I'm probably about 6 or 7 races in after we saw Sergio Perez got a couple wins, but then it was Max Verstappen. For me, the question became, how good is their car and how poorly did everyone else did with developing their car? We know by the end, Mercedes said, we have a tractor car. This is a horrible car. Toto Wolff apologizes to the drivers, like, sorry for this car. I feel like in the way they dropped the ball, and Red Bull, especially Max Verstappen, he just went for it, make records of their own, try to be one of the best. I think for Red Bull, especially Christian Horner, he's been in Red Bull for a long time. We got to remember when they first come in, after I believe it was the old Jaguar team that folded up. A lot of folks were thinking, an energy drink company buying an F1 team, running an F1 team, is this a joke? I think they almost have this chip on their shoulder, like, we want to prove we're out here to win. We want to get records, have our name in the record books, because at the end, it's not just Ferrari, McLaren, at the time Williams and all this. We're here to race, to win, and we want to leave our impact. And they certainly did. I know towards the end of the Michael Schumacher Ferrari dominant era, when Fernando Alonso and Renault came in, that brought a lot of excitement, a lot of attention to F1 because it was like, hey, we got a championship battle going on. And Alonso did it 2 years in a row. 2020, we know the hype for Abu Dhabi, especially with the two drivers being tied. Could this be the year Lewis does not get a title? We know Mercedes already had the constructors, essentially, but this was something where everyone was excited about. It's unfortunate how that race played out with race control sort of making questionable decisions, but at the end, people got excited. I think what everyone was talking about yesterday, if we have several teams contending for wins on a regular basis, I think the relief that, okay, we're not just seeing such a dominant level will be huge, bigger, I think, than 2005, 2020. I think it'll be really huge because we know Formula One, huge fan following now, their social media presence, online, they're everywhere. If people get wind that this is not going to be a Red Bull year, I think a lot of excitement is going to come back in because at the end, I feel like there was a lot of energy sort of out of F1, unless you're a Red Bull fan, then you were just loving this. But overall, I just felt like it was just sort of a long procession. And it's the longest seasons, too. So compared to Schumacher's dominance, 16, maybe 18 races, race 20. And guess what? It's going to be another Max Verstappen win.
Yeah, you're talking about 21, right? Was the battle between Hamilton and Verstappen, right?
21, yeah, correct.
Yeah, okay. I thought you might have said 20 there, but that's all right. Yeah, I got to tell you, I still think, and I know, I guess, because there are more races, they've broken McLaren's record by winning percentage, right? Because McLaren had all but one in 1988, right? They won 15 of 16. Ironically, it was Berger's Ferrari that was the one non-McLaren race winner that year, just as Sainz's Ferrari was here in 2023. I still think Mercedes in 2016 actually came the closest because if you think about how they lost their two races, in Spain, Hamilton and Rosberg took each other out. In Malaysia, Hamilton lost an engine. I suppose if you play that game, you have to give Monaco in some ways to Red Bull and Daniel Ricciardo, because if they had gotten the tires out in time when Ricciardo came into the pits, they probably would have won that race. But even then, I think if you give 100% luck and good fortune to Mercedes, I think they sweep the 2016 season. I don't think you can really make an argument that, there's an alternate universe out there where Red Bull wins Singapore this year. They were just, for whatever reason, they were so far off, and Max only managed fifth, like we mentioned, Joe. That was just not their weekend. But Joey mentioned something on yesterday's wrap-up show that I think was very interesting, something I hadn't thought of throughout the entire season, because I'm thinking to myself, this does feel a little bit different, because I was, very young when Schumacher was dominating with Ferrari. I don't remember that. I've gone back and watched highlights from those years, obviously, but I'd imagine it must have been pretty boring for, those fans watching 5 straight titles. I lived through the Mercedes dominance, and I got a little excited when Ferrari made things interesting with Vettel in 2017, 2018. But for the most part, Lewis Hamilton had the Drivers' Championship on lock. I know he lost 16 out to Rosberg, but, I'm thinking to myself, well, was it because Rosberg at least won a championship and made things interesting the last couple of years, or, what is it? And Joey brought this thing up. The championship, the fight for second, came down to a checkered flag between Ferrari and Mercedes. The fight for fourth in the driver's standings, you had 3 guys there that were separated by 1 point, with Alonso and Leclerc, and then Lando Norris 1 point back, and Sainz being up there as well. We thought maybe he had a shot at it. So when you take Red Bull, and maybe not even Red Bull, because Checo Perez really kind of had a massive slump in the summertime and towards the end of the year as well. If you just take Max Verstappen out of it, we could have been talking about one of the most fiercely competitive, closest championship battle seasons that we've had maybe since 2012, when we had 7 winners in the first 7 races. And so I think that's part of it for a lot of people. We had an opportunity for such a great battle this season. We had 5 cars, 5 entries, I guess you could say, where if you look at their number 1 drivers, of our senior drivers, if you will, you had Max Verstappen at Red Bull, Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, Charles Leclerc at Ferrari, Lando Norris at McLaren, and then Fernando Alonso at Aston Martin. Imagine a season where those 5 drivers from 5 different teams are fighting for race wins on a weekly basis. And then maybe, your second drivers like Checo Perez or George Russell or Carlos Sainz was the only non-Red Bull winner this year. They could have been up there as well. Oscar Piastri won a sprint race this year. He had some great runs in that McLaren. It could have been such a competitive year with such great battles. But the only problem was you had 1 guy and 1 car that was just not even on the same planet. I think I was listening to the SiriusXM post-race show on my drive back. I think Max Verstappen only dropped, I think it was either 45 or 46 points the entire year. When you factor in fastest laps and sprint races and the races he didn't win, that's an unbelievable number to me. But it just speaks to how dominant and how far ahead he was of the rest of the pack. And then you look at how close everybody was behind him. And I think that's really part of it that I had been missing until I watched the wrap-up show back yesterday. It was so close, these battles for second in the constructors, for fourth in the driver's standings. And that's what I think makes it, imagine if that had been for the win. Imagine if that had been for the title. We could be talking about one of the greatest seasons ever. I suppose we are talking about one of the greatest seasons ever if you're a Red Bull fan, but from an entertainment perspective, and I know that's not what sports should be all the time. There has to be some integrity and legitimacy to it as well, and sporting competition. But, it's not great for the sport, I don't think, when one team is so far ahead of the rest. And to Joey's point as well yesterday, and Kobe bringing this up, what I brought up earlier, I was rooting for Max to pull off a miracle at Singapore. I predicted on this channel that Red Bull were going to do it, because if you're going to win 21 of 22, if you're going to be this dominant, can you at least do something that's never been done before? We've never seen a perfect season. We've seen some teams come close, but we've got to wait another year for it. And imagine if Red Bull are this dominant again next year, and they only win maybe 19 of, what are we going to have, 24 races next year? They say we're going to have 24. I feel like every year, these days we have a race that has to drop out or something, but it's going to be a massive calendar next year. And to your point, Joe, as well, does the fact that the calendars are longer add to the fatigue of it's another Max Verstappen and Red Bull win? He had more race wins this year than most F1 drivers have had races in their seasons in previous years. So I think there's a lot of contributing factors, but that's the one that Joey brought up yesterday that I hadn't thought of. That, man, did we miss out on something, the potential for something special. And I hope that going into 24, we can see Ferrari and Mercedes close that gap. We can see Aston Martin give Fernando Alonso a car that's maybe competitive to take his first win in over a decade. What a sight that would be. Lando Norris, I mean, how many podiums is he up to now before he's finally going to break through? So many great storylines. I feel like we're so close. We have that potential, but there's just one team and really one driver that's standing in the way of that. And I think, all due respect to Max and what he's accomplished, but for the sake of the storylines in this sport, I think that's a real shame.
And one thing to add as well, too, that, the potential is there. The Formula One, FIA has these rules. We have the cost cap. If you're lower in the constructors, you get more wind tunnel time. The on-track product we are seeing is much better, from 80-plus passes in Las Vegas, a bunch of passes in Zandvoort, Max Homel's race. We're seeing closer competition. Yeah, we still are relying on DRS to help, but you didn't have that in 2004 back when Schumacher was dominating. When it came to Mercedes domination, we knew dirty air, getting that lead early on in the race, that was the big key. Good luck with pit stops and the undercut. There's still that sense of, we're seeing passes here. We're seeing great racing, but Adrian Newey, that Red Bull team, they just designed something so far superior, where when Sergio Perez crashed in Monaco, everybody was trying to look under the car. What's under that car? What do you have that we don't have? Because the potential is there for the competition. Following the race Sunday and the championship battle for fourth place, it was just so fascinating just seeing how one lap you had Charles Leclerc taking fourth place by 1 point. A couple of laps later, Lando Norris is now in the position, and it came down to the last lap. It was just phenomenal. And even if, okay, you were taking Max out the window and Perez, okay, well, he locked up a potential championship early. Still, it was not on the level, because I think Max had 575 points. I remember, because I was just thinking he's 25 away from 600 points. And here we are, second place in the points. They don't even have 300 points. They're like
285 for Checo.
285. Yeah. It's just ridiculous. And yeah, the level of Max, the Red Bull team, we know there's rumors that Adrian Newey had been approached by other teams, and he keeps saying no. It's like, hey, everyone's so reliant on you. If you go to another team, there's hope. But yeah, the excitement this year, that long schedule. One thing I would also like to add as well, too, and I think this at least helped F1. When Schumacher was dominating with Ferrari, you didn't have social media. Formula One president was really what you got on the Speed Channel here in the United States. Thankfully, they follow each session, and then you wouldn't hear much about it compared to NASCAR, IndyCar, where the paddock's more open, more access to the drivers. It wasn't really until United States Grand Prix showed up, and then we actually had Speed Channel there on the track, because a lot of times it was just, well, there you got the live feed, nothing. At least with social media, everyone's engaged to where, you could interact with the teams, the drivers, but also we got to hear everybody, I'm getting tired, Max Verstappen dominating this year to a new level. If we had social media back when Schumacher and Ferrari were that dominant, will we still have such a case where we'll hear all the people complaining about it? It's just very different, but yeah, I'm hopeful F1, they continue this trend of, we have a car that tries to rely more on the ground effect downforce, closer racing, keep the cost cap, the wind tunnel limits, because I'm hopeful that, we're seeing Williams climb up the ladder. Maybe somebody's going to find something better and just at least bring the fight to Red Bull. Even if Red Bull gets it again next year, just the thought of not entering another race, like unless Max Verstappen makes a big mistake, crashes out, he's going to win. Because, even for our pick a winner, it was ridiculous compared to Shane Van Gisbergen and Kyle Larson before. It was just, you were really going out there if you didn't pick Max Verstappen. And Singapore was the one race where people bailed on him as soon as we saw the starting grid. But he did lead a lap, I believe, during the safety car period. But then he had to pit in. It went up in smoke anyways.
Yeah. Well, I think I might have. I know I'm not usually on the pre-race show, but if I had picked the winner, I think I probably would have said, look, I've made my pick now. I've said they're going to do the perfect season. Max will find a way. But, that was the one weekend this year where it just wasn't going for them. I think back to, obviously we've talked about the top 5 teams, or the big 3, if you will, and then throw McLaren and Aston Martin in there with the number of podiums they had this year. Renault doesn't supply an engine to anybody. Could, maybe that allows them to focus more on the one team that they have, their works team with Alpine. And, each of their drivers took a podium this year. On their best weekends, they were right up there as well. Williams, this is the best result in years for Williams. They really look like, I know Logan Sargent, was trailing quite a bit behind Alex Albon, but you got to remember he's a rookie. And I'm hopeful that he gets a second season. Albon was phenomenal in that Williams at times this year. They've really taken a step forward. And then you keep looking down the grid, even when you get to Haas, 12 points is usually that's usually enough to keep you out of 10th place in the constructors. It's very rare that we see every constructor so much as score 1 point, let alone a double-digit number of points there. It's not that uncommon for the bottom team, maybe even the bottom 2 teams, to be stuck on 0 points, and you have to go to count back to see who's technically above the other there. So I think when you even look at the Haas's and the Alfa Romeos and teams like that, there's one more to AlphaTauris of the world. I think those teams are closer to the front of the pack than they've ever been. And that just further adds to the frustration for me. The field, I feel like, is actually very close, except for the guys that have been dominating and winning everything. And if we could just, and again, the solution is not, let's have a championship 4 and somebody takes Max out and Lando Norris ends up being your champion, right? That's not the solution I want to see. The solution I want to see is, hey, Ferrari, hey, Mercedes, you're very close. You're very close to each other. If you could work a little bit harder, be a little bit faster, and get to Red Bull, and then you got the other teams that are right behind you as well, well, then we've really got something fantastic and special in our hands. And to your point, Joe, about the regulations, I think, they've worked to a large extent. We're seeing a lot of overtakes. We're seeing a lot of close and competitive racing. You've just got to know where to find it. And I'm very partial to the underdogs. I write for Brock Beard and Last Card on Info, for crying out loud. I watched the back of the pack. I was very intrigued by what AlphaTauri were doing with Yuki Tsunoda and that battle for 7th in the constructors. That interests me. But I can see where, especially a more casual F1 fan, that's not really going to be a massive point of interest for them. They're here to see who's going to be the best, who's going to win this race, who's going to win the championship. And if that is just a foregone conclusion every weekend, that Max Verstappen is, going to do whatever it was, 17 of the last 18 races are going to be won by one driver, what? People are going to ask the question, why should I even watch? And especially here in the United States, there's such an opportunity with how popular the sport has become. I just feel like it's not a very good time to juxtapose that with a guy that's as dominant as Max Verstappen and making weekends a foregone conclusion. So, to bring it all back and wrap it up here, I feel like those are maybe the contributing factors that make it feel so different. We've seen periods of dominance before, but I don't know if it's ever been this lopsided. And I don't know if it's ever been this lopsided with so much competition beyond the dominant driver and team. And that, I think, really further adds to the frustration of having the most predictable series in 2023.
And one last point. It wasn't too long ago, we were talking about on F1 years ago about you have so many past champions on this grid. Now, we got Max, we got Lewis Hamilton, we got Fernando Alonso, but he hasn't won a race so long. 2006, his last championship. And then you look at the rest of the field. To think that out of all the active drivers, Bottas, and then everyone else is in single digits, besides Alonso with 32 wins, Verstappen, and Lewis Hamilton. It's rough being a fan of those drivers. Like, well, my driver, Bottas, we know he has a big fan following. They like to buy his calendar every year. but he was not going to score points this year unless other people crash out because you just had a lousy car. And I feel that just really could burn out fans too and just make it where, okay, I see the ads, the promos for Vegas, they show the cars side by side. But if you're the casual fan, just like, what's going on in the front? Okay, you don't like what you see in the back, then you just go away. At least Vegas had that kind of racing for the lead, but everywhere else was just, I think as you said, Verstappen leads that first corner. Okay, safe to say he's going to win this race.
Yeah, see, I didn't even think about that. That there's only 3 drivers on the grid that are actively still racing now that Vettel's retired. That can say they're F1 champions. And again, I think that's obviously a byproduct of the dominance of Lewis Hamilton and the dominance of Max Verstappen. I mean, if Fernando Alonso, as most drivers do when they get into their early 40s, says, you know what, I've had enough, I'm going to go race something else, some other series, which he did for a couple of years, by the way, or just decide to call it quits like Sebastian Vettel has, and we'd only have 2 champions. In a 20-car grid, 20 drivers on this grid, you only have 2, maybe 3 world champions. And who knows how much longer Alonso and Hamilton are going to keep doing it. I mean, I think a lot of people might forget how old Lewis Hamilton is, how long he's been around. I know he said this weekend he wants to stay until we get a race in Africa. And, I keep hoping that we're close to that with Kyalami or somewhere. But I remember an interview when his dominance with Mercedes was just starting. He says, I want to do it until I'm 37, and then I might want to go do something else in my life. And he's already gone a little bit beyond that. There's no guarantee that he's going to be around for more than a couple of years either. And if Max Verstappen, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility if he keeps dominating until the regulations change in 2026, maybe Hamilton and Alonso have both stepped away. What does it say about your series that you only have the defending world champion is the only champion on the grid? I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility for the future, but I wish as a fan. And again, I understand all credit where it's due to those that have been so dominant, but it just even more so now. Could we please get some parity? Could we please get some legitimate fights on our hands in 2024? I think the sport is going to be better for it, and it's going to be a more entertaining show, and that's ultimately what we want to see. All right, we'll leave it there. We're going to wrap it up here with our one shining moment. Joe, I apologize. I'm going to spring this on you here. I know hopefully you've got something set up for the weekend, but I'll ask you for 2 questions here. Give me a one shining moment from F2 this weekend. What stood out to you the most? And then give me, I know you're not usually on the Encore show, but you can think back to Xfinity and Trucks earlier this year from the series that we usually cover on Encore. Give me a one shining moment for the entire year from the Encore series.
For Formula 2 this weekend, definitely I would say from the sprint race, the first lap, that got me on the edge of my seat. I don't get to watch Formula 2 as often as I should try to. But to see that was like, whoa, this is going to be good. And it just set the tone for the race weekend. I felt it was really great. Overall, good weekend. If it was under lights, that would have been cool, especially the feature. But I know just the way the schedule is. It's just so weird seeing daytime racing. But those cars were just great on the track, going 3-4 wide, nearly flat out. I would say that is definitely one of my shining moments. Overall, from all the series on Grid Encore, some of the ones I think that do stood out from it, particularly I would say in looking at ARCA, the ARCA Menard series, one of the big stories coming into the year was Frankie Muniz. What would he do? He really showed he's a serious racer, and now he's going to be racing again. I think that was phenomenal to see. The Xfinity series, overall, I would be saying that, their championship battle, while it was still good to see Justin Allgaier and some of the familiar faces go there and try to compete, try to get a championship, seeing Cole Custer getting it done just by hard racing, I think that was great. And overall, I think those are some of the 2 standouts. I do have a couple more, but I'll probably save those for the Women Motorsports program, so that might give you a hint as to that. But another thing that stood out this weekend too, Felipe Drugovich, free practice 1, second fastest behind George Russell by 0.3, ahead of Carlos Sainz, which I know after what happened in Las Vegas, that team does not swing through 100%. But also ahead of Lance Stroll, the number 2 driver. Give Felipe a seat in Aston Martin. Come on. Aston Martin would have been a lot higher in the Constructors' Championship, in my opinion, if you have a new driver in there. So he gets my shining moment, my third shining moment, I guess you would say.
Yeah, totally agree. It really is a shame, and that's so much of what we talked about tonight. Dragovic was not on the grid this year, and I think he only further made that evident with that great drive in FP1. And like you mentioned, Joe, great shining moment there. I'm going to stick with what I already revealed earlier in the show, obviously, and what you just mentioned as well. What a battle on that opening lap. I think if you want to introduce somebody to Formula 2 and say, here's why you should watch this series, just show them that not even the opening lap, just the opening half lap alone, I think is enough to hook people in. And, really a great showcase for that series this weekend on a track where, we talk about it on the F1 side of things, it doesn't always produce great racing. Nobody told the F2 drivers that. I mean, they were really going for it. There were some great battles all throughout the field. And, that was really great to see. I would say for the year, the shining moment that stands out to me is probably when Riley Herbst won Las Vegas. And, we talked about on this show before as well. And, the theme of pay drivers, particularly at the, feeder levels, always comes up. It's no secret that Riley Herbst is one of them. And brings a lot of funding, brings a lot of partners and sponsorship, but he hasn't really had the results up until the back end of this year to show for it. And even this year, missed out on the playoffs driving for Stewart Haas Racing. That's not really a great look when you have a team and equipment like that. What a shame that he did miss out on the playoffs, because if he hadn't, he might have been a championship contender. He really did, after the Las Vegas race, even continue racking off these top 5 finishes and a couple of runner-up finishes to add to it. And the race that he won, it's not like he got lucky on fuel strategy or a well-timed lightning strike or whatever. He won that race by almost 15 seconds. And there was no doubt about who deserved to win that day. And Riley Herbst put on a heck of a show. And I hope that, he continues to take those steps forward next year, because I think that he's really proven a lot of doubters wrong. And that Vegas win, again, that stands out to me the most as my one shining moment for the entire year. It was really great to see somebody break through like that and take that next step, which we so often want to see young drivers take. So well done to Riley Herbst again for Las Vegas. That is going to wrap it up, not just for this show, but for this year on GRID Live Encore here in 2023. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and follow us on all of our social media platforms: X, that's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, LinkedIn, Threads, and most importantly, right here on YouTube. Join us on our journey to 1,000 subscribers and beyond. If you really liked what you saw tonight, you can take a few minutes after the show to invest in our Patreon. Join Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew in investing in GRID Network and helping to keep us on the air throughout 2023 and into 2024. As you can see, our long-term goal of $500 per month will allow us to begin attending races on site on a more regular basis, expanding our coverage for you, the viewers. If you'd rather make a one-time donation instead, you can visit the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box below and buy a coffee for your favorite on-air talent. Any amount will help us continue to grow our motorsports media outlet. Or again, if you're watching on YouTube, we have the super chats if you're watching live, or the super thanks if you're watching after the show as well. Now on Wednesday, Kobe Lambeth will be back with Matt White to bring you Grid Tonight. Women in Motorsports will be back with each of us and Isha Azim as well later in the week. So stay tuned for that. And also stay tuned for some Grid Roundtable episodes coming in December and January during the off season as well. Joe, any final thoughts as we wrap up Grid Live for 2023?
Last one of 2023. First time on the last one here. It's been a lot of fun. 2023. Cannot wait for 2024. I think especially Indy next, Formula 2. Those are going to be 2 series. I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. Formula 3, if you could get the time to. F1 Academy. We got a lot of racing still to look forward to, and just really exciting. A big thank you to everyone in the GRID Network team as well. Always, I encourage everyone. The super thanks, buy me a coffee, show your appreciation for everyone here on the GRID Network team. We all do this for our love of motorsports.
I think it was Ryan Vargas that said on social media recently that the offseason is in many ways the busiest time of year for drivers like him and for teams, particularly at this level. A lot of deals still to be finalized, a lot of pieces of the puzzle still to be put in place. And we'll look forward to monitoring that in the offseason, then bringing you all of that coverage as we have for the last couple of years here on the GRID Live Encore show in 2024. For Joe Samaniego And for Brandon Crossland and Joshua Birch, I'm Ben Schneider. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you later in the coming months with some of our other programming. But as for Encore, we'll see you down the road in 2024. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for watching us right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interview folks from the motorsports industry. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.